In this episode, we bring you the suspenseful romance drama, Escape to Heaven. Can you guess where Anthony, the love interest of Sophie Marceau's character, is? The twist at the last second reveals the answer. Let's start the movie. Our goddess Sophie Marceau, playing the heroine Chiara, is anxiously waiting for her lover Anthony in a restaurant. Anthony is a money laundering expert. Due to his sophisticated methods, the amounts involved have become enormous. To escape, Anthony underwent a complete plastic surgery, so even Chiara has never seen his current appearance. All Chiara can do now is wait. At the agreed restaurant, Chiara waited anxiously, but received only a letter from Anthony. In the letter, Anthony explained that he couldn't show up yet as it would expose his identity. He also mentioned that their affair had been discovered. Therefore, Anthony instructed Chiara to find a man with a similar build to act as a decoy to divert the gang's pursuit. He suggested that the best place to find such a person would be on a train, where there are many people and enough time to make contact. After reading the letter, Chiara burned it with a matchstick. She then headed to the train station alone, carrying her bag. On a train bound for the Blue Coast, the charming Chiara walked through several carriages, looking for someone who resembled Anthony in both build and age. Finally, her eyes settled on Francois. Chiara straightforwardly asked if anyone was there. At that moment, Francois, engrossed in his detective novel, replied without looking up, "No one. Please have a seat." Chiara then placed her handbag down, took off her coat, revealing her alluring figure. She gently spun around and sat opposite Francois, casually crossing her legs. Her high-heeled foot slightly lifted, catching Francois's gaze. His eyes followed up from her foot to her slightly tired but exquisitely attractive calf. She had an enchanting curve, but wasn't overly provocative. The scarf around her neck and the sunglasses covering half her face added a touch of aloofness. Clearly, she was a woman with a story, not someone easily approached. Their eyes met, and Chiara suddenly smiled slightly. Francois politely smiled back and then resumed reading. Chiara watched him for a moment, then casually took off her sunglasses and placed them on the table. As she began to untie her scarf, the sunglasses slid towards Francois due to the train's movement. He politely pushed them back towards Chiara without changing his expression. But the gaze that should have been on the book was somewhat erratic, occasionally glancing across. After adjusting her scarf, Chiara suddenly said to the seemingly unromantic man in front of her. Francois was taken aback and said, "Go ahead." Chiara leaned forward, tugging at the zipper on her neck, and stared at him, saying, "My zipper is stuck." She then grabbed her hair and pulled it back, giving Francois no chance to hesitate. He had to raise his hands and try to pull the zipper down. The zipper was stuck tight, requiring more time and effort. The teasing warmth took the opportunity to envelop them, just as stubborn as the zipper. However, Chiara's eyes showed no embarrassment, even a hint of playfulness, because from the moment she first saw him, she had decided to seduce him. After some conversation, they gradually became familiar with each other. Chiara asked Francois for a sweater to rest her head on and took a nap. Francois then remembered to ask her why she was sitting there. Chiara opened her warm, deep eyes and smiled gently, saying, "Because you're my type." After saying this, she put on her sunglasses. Francois's willingness to fulfill Chiara's requests gave her confidence to complete the task according to Anthony's plan. Before getting off the car, she looked at Francois and asked, "What are your plans for the weekend?" Then she gave a sweet smile. It was almost as if she was telling Francois that this was an opportunity for a carefree fling. Francois understood her intentions. They quickly took a cab to the hotel Chiara had booked. The top-floor suite had a cozy living room, a spacious walk-in closet, and a bathroom. From the open-air balcony, the blue coastline was clearly visible. Chiara sat on the sofa, smoking a cigarette. Francois followed the room manager around, trying to hide his amazement but failing. He looked like a naive boy seeing the world for the first time, which suited his role as a translator. On the spacious deck, they swam together, and Chiara suddenly asked Francois about his job. After he answered, Francois asked her what she did, but she suddenly sat up and turned her back to him, unfastening her bra. Francois quickly looked away, feeling shy. Chiara, however, looked at his profile and asked, "Do you regret staying here?" Francois turned to her, smiled, and said, "No." Chiara relaxed and closed her eyes with a smile. That night, they had dinner together, talking intimately over candlelight and wine. Francois became more proactive, and Chiara's smile grew more natural. They seemed like longtime lovers. On their way back, they walked side by side. Suddenly, Francois asked Chiara, "Why are you wearing a men's watch?" Chiara hesitated, blinked, and then smiled. She took off the expensive watch and handed it to Francois, saying, "Here, take it. It's yours." Francois stepped back and immediately refused. "I don't want it." As he was about to walk away, Chiara grabbed him and clasped the watch onto his wrist, saying, "It suits you." Back at the hotel, Chiara freshened up first and then joined Francois on the terrace. Francois, who was already there, welcomed her to enjoy the night view together. but her gaze quickly locked onto a man in black standing on the street below, staring at the terrace. Chiara's face changed, and after a moment of contemplation, she suddenly cupped Francois' face and started kissing him. After a brief moment of surprise, Francois took the initiative, but Chiara began to retreat, her eyes enticing him to follow her back to the room. The man in black kept watching the terrace until the curtains were drawn. Chiara withdrew her hand from the curtain and gently pushed Francois out, saying goodnight despite his surprised expression. Disappointed, Francois watched Chiara's departing figure and sighed helplessly. Unable to sleep, Francois sat alone on the sofa late at night, poured himself half a glass of wine, and took some anxiety medication. The guest room had only one bed, so Chiara had given him the sofa. Thus, he had no reason to knock on the bedroom door. As dawn approached, Francois was still lost in thought, staring blankly at his wristwatch. Turning the watch over, he saw an inscription on the back. Anthony Chi-Man. He slept late, and Francois woke up slowly. It was already broad daylight the next day, and he was still asleep on the sofa. Someone walked past him, and suddenly, the sound of metal hitting the floor startled him awake. A waiter, who was crouching on the floor, immediately stood up holding a spoon he had just picked up and apologized, explaining that the food on the table was requested by his wife. My wife. Francois was still groggy but let his guard down and sat up properly. After the waiter left, he saw a note from Chiara on the table, saying she would be back soon. Francois then washed up alone and put his watch back on. Just as Francois was about to pick out a shirt, he suddenly heard a noise outside the door. Alert, he walked to the door and looked through the peephole. He saw two men in black standing outside, one staring at the peephole and the other looking around. Seeing no one, they took out a room card. In an instant, Francois quickly put on the chain lock. Just as he withdrew his hand, the door was swiped open from the outside. However, the chain lock could only delay the men in black for a moment. Watching them reach in with professional tools to try to loosen the chain, Francois immediately called the front desk, but time was running out, and the chain was about to fall. Francois quickly scanned the surroundings. Finally, just before the chain loosened, he found a hiding spot. The door was pushed open, and the first thing that entered was a silenced handgun. Francois observed the movements of the two men in black from the shadows. Knowing they were up to no good, he seized an opportunity and dashed out of the room. The men in black heard the noise and fired a shot but missed Francois. Francois ran frantically, not even waiting for the elevator. He pushed open the fire escape and ran downstairs barefoot. Spiraling down 1 floor, 2 floors, 3 floors, he didn't dare stop for a moment, panting and sweating. At a corner, he collided with the railing and fell, rolling down the spiral staircase. The medicine in his pocket spilled out, and Francois had to stop to pick it up. His anxiety was tied to these medications. But before he could pick up a few pills, the ones on the steps started shaking. Someone was coming down from above. Sensing the danger, Francois didn't dare stay and hurriedly ran down, jumping steps. Finally, he exited the spiral staircase and glanced back. Just 2 or 3 floors up, a man in black was staring at his back. On the congested streets, Francois, shirtless and barefoot, runs against the traffic. He keeps glancing back, even ignoring the cars that nearly hit him. Finally, he ducks into an alley, exhausted, sliding down to the ground with his back against the wall, clutching his aching feet. But he barely rests before spotting a car turning into the alley, with a man in black still chasing him. Quickly, he crawls under a nearby car to hide. Fortunately, the man in black doesn't see him and, after looking around for a while, gets back into his car. Francois holds his breath as the car slowly drives past, only relaxing once it completely disappears from sight. At the police station, Francois, wrapped in a blanket, recounted the events to the officer. He also asked the officer to call the hotel to try to contact Chiara, but was informed that she had checked out an hour ago. Francois was at a loss, but the officer found him a pair of shoes and a shirt, then took him to the hospital to have his injured head examined. That night, Francois received a call from the officer at the hospital. The officer had already checked the room and indeed found bullet marks. He reassured Francois not to worry tonight and to call them if anything happened. However, Francois, still shaken, couldn't calm down. After lying in bed for a while, he got up to move around. He washed his face and was about to eat some yogurt when he noticed something unusual. He opened the window and saw the car that had been following him during the day entering the hospital garage. He quickly called the officer, but no one answered. The tension grew stronger and stronger, pressing down on Francois. Even the slightest noise from outside the ward made him highly alert. He held his breath and watched a figure pass by the window. Then, he hung up the phone, put on his shoes, grabbed his clothes, and quietly opened the ward door. Looking around, he saw no one, and everything was silent. After confirming it was temporarily safe, he hurriedly walked down the corridor while putting on his coat. He intended to take the elevator to the first floor and leave the hospital. As the elevator doors opened, a man holding a bouquet stood outside. He looked very kind, but Francois noticed a group of people not far away. Leading them was Saniev, who, despite working in the cabinet, was actually seeking personal gain for a high-ranking official. This official, a legitimate robber, had also collaborated with Anthony. To prevent Anthony from betraying him, he sent Saniev to find and eliminate Anthony once and for all. Just as the elevator doors were about to close, Saniev turned his head and made eye contact with Francois. Francois then took the elevator to the garage, exchanging a few words with the man holding the bouquet. Upon reaching the basement level, the man politely stepped aside, but Francois stood at the elevator door, observing the seemingly empty garage, hesitating to step out. The man holding the bouquet urged him, and he reluctantly started to leave. But after just a few steps, a car sped towards him. He quickly began to run, but the car was close behind. He reached a door, but didn't have time to open it before the car stopped right behind him. He turned around, and the car's headlights suddenly went out. The driver then leaned over and opened the passenger door. The interior light came on, revealing Giera bathed in a warm, yellow glow. Her beautiful eyes looked at him, and in an instant, his panic disappeared. With a sigh, he dragged his tired body into the car. Unable to resist, he told Giera again about being chased. To his surprise, Giera calmly said she knew. Francois, shocked, asked why. It turned out that it was all because of the kiss Giera gave him on the hotel terrace. The pursuers saw it and mistook him for Anthony, as he indeed resembled Anthony. To Giera, he was just a stand-in for Anthony. Francois tried to get more information from Giera, but she refused to say more. As the car approached the garage door, it hadn't had time to drive out yet. Two pairs of legs in black trousers appeared outside the slowly rising door. Realizing they might be pursuers, Giera immediately reversed and parked in a spot beside the passage, turning off the lights to hide. She quietly observed the movements of the men in black. Suddenly, another car drove out of the garage, and to her surprise, it was the man with the bouquet. Francois wanted to get out of the car, but Giera stopped him and quickly entered the passage before him. She almost recklessly rushed out of the parking lot before the garage door closed. She sped all the way to an old, dilapidated apartment building. After stopping, Giera asked Francois to wait in the car while she went upstairs. Francois nodded in agreement, but secretly checked the car after she left. After searching for a while, he found a hotel business card, which seemed to be where Giera was currently staying. He quickly noted the hotel's name and put everything back in place just as Giera opened the apartment door and signaled him to follow her upstairs. They walked one after the other through a dimly lit and slightly damaged corridor. Who would have thought that such an apartment would hide a simply yet elegantly decorated and fully equipped room? This was the hideout Giera had prepared for Francois. Before leaving, she advised that in just a few days, everything would be over and he could return to his normal life. But Francois persistently asked when they would meet again. Chiara was taken aback and finally said bluntly, "Don't you understand? It wasn't a coincidence that I sat across from you on the train. I knew we were being followed, and what would happen to you? I deceived you." This kind of honesty was almost a breaking point, and Francois refused to believe it. Seeing Chiara about to leave, he chased after her without thinking and asked, "Is it worth doing all this for him?" Chiara just looked at him for a moment without saying a word, then left the apartment. The next morning, after freshening up, Francois opened his wardrobe filled with new suits. He changed into an outfit, looking like a business elite, and hurriedly walked through the streets, heading straight to the hotel where Giera was staying. Upon inquiring at the front desk, he confirmed that Giera was indeed there. He grabbed a newspaper and sat across from the hotel, keeping an eye on it. He was waiting for Giera. He accidentally discovered that the officer who helped him yesterday was on the news because he was found dead at home last night. This news undoubtedly made Francois. Fortunately, not long after, Giera walked out of the hotel entrance. Francois immediately followed her all the way to a cafe where he saw Giera reading a newspaper. He unceremoniously sat next to her and asked when Anthony would arrive. Giera looked at him with some displeasure and reminded him that he was courting death, but he replied, "I deserve it." Seeing his indifferent attitude, Giera frowned and asked again, "What do you want?" To her surprise, Francois raised his hand to touch Giera's face. She immediately dodged, but he persisted, saying, "Someone is watching us. You should kiss me." Giera, unwilling to argue, stood up and left. Unexpectedly, he followed her closely, even asking, "Don't you think Anthony is despicable for coming up with such a scheme that involves innocent people? If a man truly loves you, he should risk his life, not hide like this." Francois moved closer to Giera and said, "I risked my life to see you." Hearing this, Giera finally turned her head and angrily said, "You don't understand anything." Just then, a bus arrived, and Giera quickly got on. Francois tried to follow but was stopped because he had no money. He then hailed a taxi to chase after her. However, shortly after, two black cars suddenly intercepted the taxi. A man got out of one of the cars and dragged Francois away. This time, he was taken to the customs interrogation room, where one of the masterminds, Customs Chief Ackerman, finally came to see him. From Ackerman, Francois learns that Giera is also a customs officer. For the past few months, they have been using Giera to locate Anthony, and Giera is aware of this. Although Anthony is very clever and has escaped capture several times, Ackerman knows that Giera is Anthony's weakness. At night, Ackerman and Giera have a secret meeting where Ackerman asks Giera to meet Anthony at his previous house. This all stems from a small house for sale ad in the International Herald Tribune. After years of experience, Ackerman had become very familiar with Anthony's habits. He confidently believed that this was Anthony's message for a meeting with Giera. Faced with Ackerman's stubbornness and confidence, Giera had no choice but to comply. However, she also learned about Francois's current situation from Ackerman. To Ackerman, Giera had always seemed cold and ruthless, but she was willing to go to the hospital to save Francois, whom she could have ignored. This piqued Ackerman's interest in her and made him curious about Francois's place in Giera's heart. So, he kept Francois by his side to prevent him from causing any disruptions. Even when they went to capture Anthony, he still brought Francois along. The group hides in a moving company's truck not far from the house. Surveilling the house from almost every angle. On the other side, Giera hid the bug and prepared herself. She drove alone to the agreed location. This was the second time she received information about Anthony. But instead of her lover, she found Saniev, who wanted to capture Anthony. Seeing that Anthony was not showing up, Saniev ordered Giera to be beaten to force Anthony to appear. The customs officers immediately requested instructions from Ackerman, hoping to stop Saniev. However, Ackerman remained calm and insisted that everyone hold their positions and wait for Anthony to show up. However, the person who appeared in front of Giera was Francois, who had somehow sneaked out of the container truck. But Saniev insisted that Francois was Anthony. Even though Giera clarified that Francois was not Anthony, Saniev didn't believe it and raised his gun towards Francois. Seeing this, Giera's face changed dramatically, and she shouted, "Ackerman," twice into the monitor in terror. As soon as she finished speaking, a sniper in hiding pulled the trigger, and Saniev fell to the ground. A gunfight ensued immediately. Francois protected Giera and hid with her, showing that he was willing to risk his life for her. When the gunfight ended, Saniev's group was completely wiped out. The customs officers were busy cleaning up the mess. Giera, however, took off her shoes, holding a cup of tea, and stood alone by the floor-to-ceiling window, lost in thought. Her eyes, gazing at the mountains, were filled with tears. Francois walked up to her, gently wiped her cheek, and asked with concern, "Do you want to see him again?" Giera immediately replied, "Yes, I want to catch him." Then, she turned around, leaning against the floor-to-ceiling window, looking at Anthony's house. She sighed and said, "I've been wondering where he's hiding. I need to see him." At this moment, Francois suddenly approached Giera, skillfully unbuttoned her collar, and gently removed the bug hidden on her. He then calmly said, "I'm right here." Giera was too shocked to speak. Francois held Giera's head close to his lips, kissing her ear while repeating, "I'm here, I'm right here." It was then that Giera finally realized what was happening. It turns out that the lover she longed for, the one she was willing to give everything for, had already reunited with her. Just then, customs officials suddenly approached and informed Giera to meet Ackerman. Hearing this name, Giera immediately sobered up. After sending the official away, she turned to Francois and, trying to stay calm, said, "You have 2 minutes to escape." But she didn't know that Francois had already decided to stay with her. If they were to escape, they would do it together. If they were to stay, they would stay together. After Chiara left, Francois opened a hidden safe and took out the notebook containing all the bank account information. He deliberately placed it in the most conspicuous spot by the door. When Chiara calmed down and went downstairs to find Ackerman, the notebook had already been handed to him. This was not Anthony's style. Ackerman, however, stared at the man giving a statement not far away and said, "I don't think he will let go." Following his gaze, Chiara realized that Francois had not left. She couldn't help but walk over to him, just in time to hear the officer ask, "What's your name?" Francois didn't answer, but looked at Giera. Giera hesitated for a moment and then replied, "His name is Francois." She smiled slightly after saying it. From that moment on, there would be no more Anthony in this world. Only Francois, a translator who could live openly without hiding, and a lover who could be with Giera forever. The movie ends with a typical French romance. Despite its crime thriller structure, every shot carries the unique delicacy of a French art film. The intertwining details make one wonder if the male lead was unsure about Giera's feelings for him, prompting him to devise a plan that would allow him to escape, while also seeing if Giera's feelings were unwavering. His final act of removing the listening device answers many previous scenes. Why did he pretend to be unaware in front of Giera? Because someone was tracking her and she had a listening device on her. He had to be the passive one. That's it for this video.